Hello and welcome back to Foreign Correspondents. I'm Somi Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program. Thank you.
Hello,
for being
thank you.
Now, in the latest red flag in South Korea's demographic trends, the number of deaths this year is forecast to outpace the number of births for the first time. And many experts say the country is on the verge of falling off a demographic cliff. So on this week's edition of Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to discuss some of the changes that are on the horizon in the midst of Korea's falling population and what the country can do to brace itself against the shock. According to a report released by Statistics Korea on March 27th, the total number of deaths in the country this year is expected to outpace the number of births for the first time, with the country's overall population being forecast to enter a declining phase in 2028. Now, 2028, that's less than a decade away. So what do you think are some of the major contributing factors for this projected decline?
I think education is very costly here in Korea. So one person who is working as a board member of a big conglomerate, he said he made an investment in his high school boy, 3 million won every month.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a huge burden for raising a child in Korea.
Right.
I mean, in Korea, the problem is that you mentioned that it's a price. I mean, it's very expensive to raise a child here. The education is extremely expensive. I mean, you want to raise your child in a good housing, and housing is very expensive too. So there is not only like the cost of life of raising children is very expensive, and there is as well a lot of social expectation. Like you think, oh, if I'm poor, I cannot have children. While, I mean, I think there is no reason why you shouldn't have children even if you're not as rich as other people. But I think that there is a lot of unrealistic expectation, social expectation as well.
Right. And it's gotten to a stage where having more than one child is somewhat a status symbol, almost.
Yeah,
because it costs so much. Anne?
Right. The entire economic outlook for young people in South Korea is pretty dark. So for them to think about raising a family, first they have to think about getting a job, and the unemployment rate is high. And then they have to think about housing, as you mentioned, getting married, which is also expensive, and then the education costs, as we've already talked about. So altogether, all of these factors make it so child birth and raising a child are not so attractive.
Because of the huge financial burden. Now, the South Korean government's population forecast is released every 5 years. So the next set of projections were originally due to be released in 2021. However, the government released its latest population forecast 2 years earlier than scheduled, after the country's fertility rate dropped below the 1.0 mark last year for the first time in the country's history. This raised alarm bells over the low birth rate and falling population.
연간 출생아 수는 2017년 35만 명에서 2067년에는 지금의 3분의 2 미만 수준으로 감소한 21만 명이 될 것으로 보입니다.
And in order to stem the population decline, the government spent a staggering 153 trillion won over the last 13 years in policies to encourage families to have more children. But evidently, it still wasn't enough to reverse the trend. Why do you think that is, that 153 trillion won wasn't enough to reverse this declining trend?
It's a lot of money to spend, but these are subsidies that happen after the child is born, like child care, and maybe workplace leave for women. But there could be a lot more that would be done in advance to encourage people to think about starting a family. So Korea you know, the immigration policies are not so friendly. The workplace equality measures for women are not so friendly. So these are big barriers.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is fundamental. You can throw how much money, you need social changes, and you can throw how much money as you want. If you don't change the society, it will not work. In Korea, women, they have to choose between having kids or their career. Right. It's almost, I mean, except, of course, there's always exception, but if, for example, especially if you're very rich and you can afford a nanny, or, but most of the women have to make a choice between those two. And the employment of women in Korea is it's the lowest of the OECD country.
Right.
It's only 56.2%. And I mean, you know, in Korea, the region where the birth rate is the highest, it's Sejong City. Why Sejong City? Because there is it's an administrative capital of Korea. This is where there is a lot of government workers, and government job means social stability. It means decent working hours, and it means more gender equality because the recruitment process is equal for women. In this area, it's not a mistake, it's not an accident that the birth rate is so high. And the government should really think hard and completely change the policy there. Just throwing money is not the solution. You need like social change.
Okay. Now, the term demographic cliff, it was first coined by world-renowned economist Harry Dent in a book of the same name. South Korea's working age population, or those between the ages of 15 and 64, is already on the decline after reaching its peak in the year 2017. Do you think a fall in the working age population is more worrisome compared to a fall in the overall population or the elderly or the adolescent population?
Maybe I will play devil's advocate here, but I don't think it's that worrisome because we have the technology to improve the productivity. And in Korea, I mean, there is a lot of job unemployment problem. As I said, only 56.2% of women are employed. So there is a lot of, it's not like there is a lot of job that we cannot find people to work in those positions. So I don't think that's such a big issue. We can increase the productivity thanks to the technology, and there will be more employment opportunities, maybe for women as well.
Okay.
Right now, I believe in the OECD, Korea actually has the highest rate of working age people. So it has some time to, I guess, figure out this problem. So what's more worrisome is the rapidly aging population. And these people, I think by the year 2065, if current trends continue, they will make up more than 45% of Korea's overall population. And so if there's fewer working age people to support them, and they're demanding more welfare services, the pension scheme won't be able to keep up.
Right, there's a higher burden on the working population to support the elderly. Now, some South Korean media outlets have referred to the ongoing phenomenon as a population shock, with disruptive and alarming changes to society being forecast as a direct result of the falling population. What are some notable social changes that we can expect to take place in a society with a declining population?
So many Japanese people are worrying about so-called double care.
Double care.
Double care, it means need to take care of kids, not only kids, but also their parents.
Both
so at the
generations.
same time. So it's going to be very challenging to them. And also, in an aging society, so the society is very slow. So now in Korea, subway comes every 5 minutes, right? But in an aging society, it doesn't make sense because the elderly cannot move so quick. So society will be very slow.
It'll slow down. Okay. Now, Anne, you mentioned the aging population, right? So the low birth rate will not only lead to a falling population, but an aging one as well. The number of senior citizens in South Korea is expected to surpass the 10 million mark in 2025 and reach 19 million by the year 2067. This has raised concerns that the working age population will have to shoulder a much heavier burden to provide care for the rising number of senior citizens. So what can we do to lessen the growing future burden on the working class or the working age population to support the elderly?
Well, unfortunately, I think if the elderly make up such a huge percentage of the population, they will just have to keep working longer later into life.
I disagree with that. And first, I wouldn't frame the question as a burden. I mean, I think the question should be, how do we convince younger people that they have to show solidarity and they have to share? I mean, we live in a society where like the communities are disappearing, but it's a bad thing. And I think, I mean, Korea is a very rich and very developed country. There is enough, more than enough food and good housing for everybody to live very, very comfortably. So I think the real question is, how do we redistribute the wealth in a fair way? Like, people are really rich here. Like, people spend a lot of money in things that are actually not necessary. So it's, I mean, as a human being, I don't think we should frame this question as a burden. You see?
We should focus more on the redistribution of the overflowing wealth
I mean,
that exists.
Yes, but I think we should work until at least until late 60.
60?
Yeah.
So you think retirement age should be pushed a bit
so
further?
in Japan already you can work until 65 if you make a new labor contract with a company.
Right.
Of course, wage is decreasing bit by bit.
Right. But there should be an option, right?
Yeah.
That you're not forced to work
Right.
up until you're 70.
Yes, right.
But if you want to, then you can by negotiating a new contract. Okay. South Korea operates the National Pension Service in order to support the lives of the elderly in their years after retirement. However, there are worries that the pension pool will eventually dry up due to a surge in the number of senior citizens in the country, raising the need for a possible reform. Now, could you tell us more about the pension system that exists in Japan?
Some people are worried that pension system will collapse in the future.
Because of the aging population?
Right. Young people are very doubtful about whether they can receive pension or not.
Whether they will benefit from the system.
So they will have some kind of resentment. So they supported the elderly, but they can receive less support from younger generation.
Right.
So resentment will be there.
Right.
Yeah, the French system is a bit different from Korea. In Korea, you have a pension system where you give money every month and this money is invested, and then when you retire, you will get the benefit from that. In France, the working people are paying now for the people retired. It's a solidarity-based system.
Okay.
The problem is, of course, if the active population is shrinking, then you need to adapt by, and this is what the government is doing actually, by increasing what you have to pay every month.
The ratio of your pay.
Exactly, by reducing the amount of pension like retired people, by making people work longer. I mean, the system is not perfect, but I think it's a bit safer than the pension, like the current type of system, like pension fund-based system where
you're paying for your own pension.
Yeah, and if there is, if people invest the money wrongly, if there is economic shock, you can lose all your pension, which is very risky.
Okay. What about in the United States?
In the US, we have Social Security, and that includes a program for senior citizens. So the administration withholds taxes, and that amount is matched by your employer. Beginning at age 62, you can start claiming your benefits. However, the scheme operates so that the longer you wait, the better your benefits are. It encourages you to wait as long as possible, usually to 67, to get more monthly, a bigger monthly payment. But still, the amount that you're given, even if you get the maximum, it's only designed to replace 40% of your income prior to retirement. So it's really not enough to live on. And then also we had the big baby boomer generation who all started claiming their Social Security at one time. So with that, put a huge burden on the system, and young people in the US are also worried that there won't be anything for them. And according to studies, by 2034, there won't be anything for them.
Okay. Now let's focus on the economic ramifications of a country's falling population, because economics and demographics, they often go hand in hand, with many experts agreeing that a falling population will result in a downward spiral of consumption, production, and income reductions. Which job sectors and industries do you think will be most affected?
I think logistics will be damaged so badly. For example, so in Korea, so the company named Coupang provide a service so-called rocket delivery.
Yes.
Right? If you can order something on the website, then you can get product.
Yes, same day delivery.
Yeah, that's right. So it will be impossible in the future because of lack of truck drivers. Yeah, and also demand for construction will be very weak.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm afraid that real estate agent will be obsolete. Also, it will be challenging for us to get enough manpower at fire station and the police station. So the society will be very fragile.
Is that the situation that we're seeing in Japan right now?
Yeah, so it is what we worry about. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can think as well of, I mean, we can see that in Korea already, where the number of postpartum clinics, birth clinic, many of them are closing just because there is less children being born.
Right.
Maybe, I mean, I will play devil's advocate again, but I mean, if we look at the big picture, anyway, our planet is too small to sustain a certain number of people. So the population will have to stabilize. Of course, you don't want that to happen in your country. You don't want to be the country that sees the population reducing. But anyway, for the human species, that's the long-term goal. We cannot, I mean, we cannot leave 20 billion people on this planet. The planet is not big enough. So we will really have to, I mean, so generation, it's not our generation, but the future generation will have to invent a new model of society where we can live together.
Right, sure. Now, Sakabe, it's reported that in Japan there is a shortage of labor due to the decline in the working population.
Yes.
How serious is this problem?
So hiring people is very challenging in Japan. So I heard one very interesting story. So there is a silent refusal. Silent refusal. It means so one job seeker received a tentative job offer from one company, but so that company tried to contact with him. So suddenly contact was cut off.
They fall off the radar.
Yes, the job seeker, the same job seeker, we try to find another company.
Right.
So it is very challenging.
Now, as we've already alluded to, South Korea is not the only country grappling with a population decline. The birth rates of around 90 countries across the globe fall below the population replacement level of 2.1. And around 30 of those nations have entered a stage of population decline. So what are some notable population trends going on in the US right now?
The US right now is facing a declining birth rate, just like many developed nations around the world. And right now it's around 1.77. But within that statistic, there are some interesting trends happening. The birth rate is higher in rural, perhaps less educated places than it is in urban, more educated places. So places like the Midwest are seeing a higher birth rate than places like the West Coast or the East Coast.
And do you think it's directly related to education, or are there other factors at play?
I think it's related to a lot of factors. Some urban areas are so unaffordable to live in. So a lot of people are migrating to mid-sized cities that have good education, good jobs, and are more affordable.
Right.
And then they're starting families there.
Okay. Now, Sakabe, the Abe administration has rolled up its sleeves and has formed a new ministry to help the country's population stay above the 100 million mark until the year 2060. Could you tell us more about this ministry and the policies that it's instilling?
Yes, Abe policy is composed of 4 pillars. So one is making a society in which 100 million people can reach the potential. So I think 100 million people is a psychological marginal line in Japan in order to keep enough market
Right.
for Japanese companies to make money.
Right.
But Mr. Abe made an announcement of this plan in 2015.
Okay.
But in 2016, 2017, 2018, in 3 consecutive years, the number of newly born babies are less than 1 million. So not so easy to reverse a trend.
Right. Now, Fred, France, although it has seen a decline in recent years, it still has one of the highest, or the highest, birth rate in all of Europe. How is that possible?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there is for the last 4 years there is a small drop, but from I can read from the expert or the news, there is no cause for alarm. For the last 40 years, the birth rate in France was between 1.8 and 2, and we saw a worse drop in the 90s. There was a crisis, and it was 1.65% children per woman. So why is the birth rate so good? Relatively good. I mean, I think the environment is generally good for parenting. We have short working hours, so that means you can pick up your kids at school, and we have a lot of kindergarten, so there is a lot of opportunities places to put your kids when you work. The education is free, so you don't. I mean, I think it's very important, especially in Korea, when you always have to worry, I have to pay for the private institutes, the Hagwon institutes. In France, everything is free, and we trust the public education is trusted enough that people don't pay for private education.
That is the big difference, I think, because public education is free in Korea.
Yeah, but in practice, everybody pays for private institutes. And I think the last point, and I think it's a very important one, is gender equality. In France, people expect women to go back to work after childbirth. And this is something, for example, in Germany, that is not the case. There is much more social pressure to stay at home and take care of the kids, something you can see in Korea, or maybe in Japan as well. And I think that plays a big role as well, because women know that it's totally okay to, after 3 months after the birth of your child, you put your kid in the kindergarten and you go back to work.
And you're not considered a bad mom.
Of course,
for doing that.
yeah, of course.
That's also very important.
Perfectly normal.
Now, Anne, according to data released last December, the United States has seen its population growth hit an 80-year record low. Despite the drop, the United States is still one of the few countries in the developed world whose population is still on the rise. How was the US able to maintain such healthy population growth over the years?
I think it's because we accept immigrants, more immigrants than Korea does. And so actually, if you look at statistics, just the immigrants coming in are making up maybe around 40% of our population growth. And by 2030, it'll be the primary contributing factor. But also immigrants have a higher birth rate than most native-born white women.
Right. Now, the falling population is likely to affect or impact the future generation more than the current one. So what kind of preemptive measures can we take to make sure that the future generation don't suffer from the adverse effects of a falling population?
I mean, there is no magic bullet. The future generation will have to help more the older generation, because there will be less of them and more older folks.
Yes.
So I think it's important to now prepare policies, to social policies and economic policies where we'll have a better redistribution of wealth, because really that's the key. The more unequal the society are, the more unsustainable.
Unsustainable and unhappy everyone.
Exactly, and the more unhappy you are, the less children you make. Usually, it's linked.
It's all linked. Anne?
I think education is very important to institute a broad, sweeping change in the culture to make it better for women who are working, for just workers and their hours, so that people want to actually have children.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so demographic crisis is as same as silent crisis. So you don't need a nuclear weapon, and you don't need any gun in order to destroy Japan or South Korea, because population is declining. So again, I would like to make a proposal that we should shrink strategically. Yeah. So we try to put emphasis on expanding, right? But we don't have to, put less value on shrinking. think strategically is very important.
A fundamental paradigm shift.
Yes, right.
All right, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much
much.
for your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As mentioned earlier in our discussion, many countries across the world are grappling with a serious population decline. However, the problem is far more acute in South Korea, which is forecast to see the largest decline of any nation over the next 5 decades. So with this in mind, we hope the country can act with a renewed sense of urgency to better prepare and cushion itself against the impending population shock. That's all we have for this week. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.